This is the 23rd broadcast in the series America Looks Abroad, presented by the officers and staff members of the Foreign Policy Association. This nonpartisan organization, open to all who are interested in American foreign policy, offers accurate information on current world events. In the world of today, foreign affairs are your affairs. The struggle now raging in Norway may prove decisive for the future course of the European war, especially in its effect on the fate of the Low Countries and of the Balkans. Mrs. Vera Michelis Dean, Director of Research Department of the Foreign Policy Association, will discuss War Spreads in Europe. Mrs. Dean.
Good afternoon. At this moment, a struggle which may prove decisive for the future course of the European war is raging in Norway, where the Allies are at grips with the Germans on land, at sea, and in the air. The outcome of this struggle is bound to have far-reaching effects. If the Germans succeed in establishing air bases on the Norwegian coast, their bombing planes will be only 300 miles by air from the British naval base at Scapa Flow, and the Norwegian fjords would provide many submarine bases from which German U-boats could attack British shipping in the North Sea. The fate of Belgium and Holland also hangs on the outcome of the Norwegian conflict. If the Germans can use Norway as a base for attack on Britain, they may postpone their plans to invade the Low Countries. But if the Germans are repulsed in Scandinavia, they may try to break the deadlock on the Western Front by striking at their allies through Holland. On Friday, a state of siege was proclaimed in Holland. The Dutch thus hope to avoid the danger that pro-Nazi elements, which are said to have some support in the Dutch army, might help the Germans by acts of treachery, as was the case in Norway. If Holland is invaded by Germany, it will have the assistance of Belgium's well-trained army. And of course, a German invasion of the Low Countries would bring France and Britain to the aid of Belgium and Holland. For all these reasons, it would seem that Germany will invade the Low Countries only as a last resort. The outcome of the Norwegian conflict will also have a decisive effect on developments in the Balkans. A German victory in Scandinavia might frighten the Balkan countries into submitting to Germany, before they, too, are brought under what the Nazis call protection. It might also cause the so-called non-belligerents, Italy and Russia, to enter the conflict, not so much for the purpose of aiding Germany against their allies as of achieving their own ambitions and forestalling German encroachments on their respective spheres of influence. On the contrary, an Allied victory might rally the Balkan countries to the side of Britain and France and persuade Italy and Russia to remain on the fence. In the Balkans, as in Scandinavia, Germany and the Allies have been engaged in a tug-of-war to win control of neutral countries by propaganda, economic pressure, and threats of retaliation. On the eve of Germany's invasion of Norway, it looked as if the struggle for the Balkans would result in an economic stalemate for Germany, especially now that Britain is buying up foodstuffs in the Balkans for Allied troops in the Near East. The countries of southeastern Europe have been increasingly reluctant to meet the Reich's demand for additional exports, partly because they do not want to alienate France and Britain, and partly because they themselves are afraid of shortages in case war spreads to the Balkans. Yesterday, for example, Germany signed a new trade agreement with Romania. By this agreement, Germany promises to send armaments and airplanes to Romania in return for shipments of Romanian wheat. But the Romanian government has refused to increase exports of oil to Germany, as demanded by the Nazis. Just as the Allies and Germany finally clashed in Scandinavia over control of Swedish iron ore, so the belligerents may now clash in Romania over control of another essential war material, this time oil. But if Germany is to strike at Romania, it must first invade Hungary. Unlike Romania, Hungary has no guarantee of assistance from the Allies. Hungary, moreover, is isolated in Eastern Europe. It would be impossible for the Allies, even if they wanted, to give the Hungarians military assistance. In Hungary, the Germans could seize an important source of foodstuffs. Before 1914, Hungary had been the granary of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and also a source of bauxite, which is needed for the production of aluminum. Once in control of Hungary, the Nazis could demand the return of territory that Romania took from the Hungarians in 1919, and thus begin the dismemberment of Romania. A German attack on Hungary or other countries of southeastern Europe would mean that the Nazis had decided they could not impose their will on the Balkans by methods short of force. That they are trying other methods before resorting to outright violence is shown by reports of feverish Nazi activities in Hungary, Romania, and Yugoslavia. In Romania, King Carol is continuing his efforts to establish a united political front. He has released members of the Iron Guard, previously banned for their pro-Nazi activities. In Yugoslavia, former Premier Stojadinovic, who had been known as a warm supporter of Germany and Italy, was arrested last Thursday on the charge that he had been plotting to overthrow the government with the aid of German Nazis. If pro-Nazi elements could succeed in Norway, where they formed an infinitesimal proportion of the population, and where social and political conflicts had been reduced to a minimum, you can imagine how much more effective they have been in countries like Hungary, Romania, and Yugoslavia, which chronically suffer from serious internal problems. To begin with, there are large German minorities in each of these countries, and these German minorities represent an advance guard of Nazi penetration. Then the economic problems generated by the World Depression have hit the Balkan countries severely, producing the same kind of discontent among the lower middle classes and students which made it possible for Hitler to seize power in Germany. The Balkan countries are also dependent economically on the German market. Add to this the fact that not one of the Balkan countries is really united internally, so that in Romania, for example, there is a constant struggle between Romanians, Hungarians, and Germans, while in Yugoslavia there is still a conflict between Serbs and Croats. When all these problems are taken into consideration, the wonder is not that Nazi propaganda has made headway in southeastern Europe, but that it has not proved more destructive. The course followed by the hard-pressed Balkan countries will depend ultimately not only on the relative pressures applied to them by Germany and their allies, but also on the attitude of Italy and Russia. Mussolini is now approaching the point where he may have to make the choice between the two belligerents, which he has so far carefully avoided. He prides himself on his independence. He insists that whatever his decision, it will be made without consideration for the wishes of either Germany or their allies. Germany, of course, hopes that Italy will enter the war at this juncture and divert the attention of their allies from the north to the Mediterranean and the Balkans. To encourage Italian action, Germany has hinted that at the end of this war, Britain's domination of the seas will be ended, that Britain will be ousted from Gibraltar and Suez, and that Italy will thus obtain unchallenged control of the Mediterranean, while Germany rules Central and Eastern Europe. The majority of Italians, however, have little sympathy for Germany. They still passionately hope to avoid war, even though many of them will welcome the breakup of the British Empire. Many Italians and even fascists also fear that a German victory in Europe would reduce Italy to the position of a vassal state, which would be forced to follow Germany's dictation. As a matter of fact, while Mussolini's policy has served the purposes of Hitler, it is neither pro-German nor pro-Ally. It is first and foremost pro-Italian. Mussolini apparently still hopes to achieve his ambitions without sacrificing either men or material by participation in the war. These ambitions include, first, special rights for Italians in Tunisia, in North Africa, over which France has a protectorate. Second, a free port in the French port of Djibouti on the Red Sea, which used to serve as the principal outlet for the trade of Ethiopia before that country was conquered by Italy. And third, a share in the control of the Suez Canal, which is operated by a private company, now controlled by French and British stockholders. The threats and warnings that have been coming from Rome since Germany's invasion of Norway may be intended to force concessions on these points from France and Britain. Should Italy, however, decide to strike at their allies, it could probably cut communications through the Mediterranean and effect a quick landing of considerable forces, either in Greece or Yugoslavia. Such a naval attack could be supported by a land attack from Albania, which Italy conquered in 1939. If this move succeeds, the Allied forces now massed in the Near East would find it difficult to obtain supplies of men and material from the West, but they would still remain in communication with the French and British empires further east. I doubt that Italy would take the risk of concentrating its fleet in the eastern Mediterranean. Such a move would leave its west coast exposed to Allied attack. France might then deliver blows by land and air on Italy's vital industries, which are concentrated in the north. Meanwhile, France and Britain could close the exits and entrances to the Mediterranean at Gibraltar and Suez, and prevent overseas supplies from reaching Italy. The Allies could also cut off Italy from its colonies in East Africa, including the newly conquered Ethiopia. Reports last week indicated that Allied troops in the Near East might be used not for operations against Germany in the Balkans or Russia in the Caucasus, as has sometimes been expected, but against Italian possessions in Africa. Of course, Allied operations in this region will depend on the action of Russia. Any attempt by Germany and Italy to alter the Balkan situation will probably bring Russia into the fray. Russia is not primarily interested in helping either Germany or Italy, but it would certainly act to protect its own interests in the Balkans. Moscow still hopes to recover Bessarabia, a Russian province seized by Romania in 1918. It is also concerned with the fate of the Slav countries in the Balkans, Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. It is significant that Yugoslavia, which has had no diplomatic relations with Russia since the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, is now on the point of concluding a trade agreement with Moscow. This is particularly interesting in view of the fact that Yugoslavia now seems to be opposed to Germany and Italy. By this new treaty, Yugoslavia would apparently obtain machinery and armaments manufactured in former Czechoslovak factories with Soviet raw materials. Meanwhile, it looks as if Russia would also like to end the rift that has existed in its relations with their allies since the conclusion of the Soviet-German Pact last summer, by signing a trade treaty with Britain. This may seem paradoxical, but a determined effort by the allies to defeat Germany might remove Moscow's fear that the allies were merely encouraging Hitler to destroy the Soviet Union. As war spreads in Europe, it brings in its wake economic privation and political restrictions, which threaten to transform the continent into a vast armed camp of impoverished and enslaved peoples. And as war spreads, the hope of neutral countries that they might escape the horrors of the conflict become increasingly dim. Much as the neutrals hate war, they now realize that on the outcome of this conflict depends not only the fate of their allies and Germany, but their own fate as well. It can only be hoped, in the dark hours through which we are passing, that out of this new realization of the need for solidarity in the tasks of war may emerge the determination to achieve solidarity in the tasks of peace.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Vera Michelis Dean, Director of the Research Department of the Foreign Policy Association, was today's speaker in the America Looks Abroad series. If you would like a free copy of this talk, send your request to the Foreign Policy Association, 8 West 40th Street, New York. We shall repeat that address. Send your request to the Foreign Policy Association, 8 West 40th Street, New York City. We invite you to tune in again next Sunday to hear another speaker in the America Looks Abroad series. This is the National Broadcasting Company, RCA Building, Radio City, New York.